So with just a few weeks left to go of Doctor Who Season 2, people are wondering, where's it all going? What's the ultimate payoff? What's the ultimate ending for this series, for this story, for this era? What is Russell's grand plan? Is there a grand plan? And after today's episode, The Story in the Engine, I couldn't help but think about all the things that are starting to line up and how I think I may have figured out, at least in some capacity, what this era, what these set of series are trying to communicate and where they're ultimately going to end up. But before we get into that, do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and any support would be greatly appreciated. I'd love to hit it by the end of the series, but I don't think it's going to happen. But hey, I'll put it out there, you never know what happens. So the immediate thing that set me off to this theory is the fact that in today's episode, Belinda sees a vision of a little girl, specifically the same little girl who was Captain Poppy in Space Babies, only this time she's slightly older and walking around. And initially I didn't even clock that it was her, but obviously people pointed it out afterwards. And what's interesting is the Doctor's line at the end is stories leaking out of the barbershop, essentially. That's what he thinks is happening. Stories are leaking out of where they were, which explains why she saw that child. But of course we know the Space Baby story was never told in the barbershop. So where does that come from? What if it's not the barbershop, but instead part of the wider arc? What if it is part of Mrs. Flood's whole plan? Now, this actually comes back to something that I was actually present for almost last year, I think it was. Anita Dobson was at Cardiff Comic Con, and she said something very interesting about Space Baby specifically.
He never does anything without a reason. It looks like it's random. Do you remember the first episode was with the babies, the babies on that planet that were running the spaceship? And I remember I watched it and thought, what's this about? Where's this come from? When I started filming what you're going to see soon, I thought, I think I know what this is about. Everything's tied up. Everything's done for a reason. He's very clever. He's thinking ahead all the time, And if it doesn't work, if something doesn't work, then he'll find a way to get around it. He'll write something that will circumvent that. He's very clever.
First of all, I just love how baffled even Anita Dobson was by the concept of Space Babies. That's very funny to me. But also she says that she thought it was random, but having read more scripts, it started to click into place for her. So I mentioned that at the end of Story in the Engine, it's implied that stories are leaking outwards. But what if that's been happening across the era? Because if we go back to Space Babies, there's some very interesting lines of dialogue that kind of hint to this whole sort of narrative arc starting as early as that. So going back to Space Babies, early on, the Doctor and Ruby alongside Jocelyn are trying to figure out what the bogeyman is, and this piece of dialogue exchanges. The Doctor and Ruby say, "You don't know." Jocelyn says, "It has nothing to do with me. It wasn't part of the manifest. It's not like anything I've ever seen." The Doctor says, "Nor me. But it reminds me of something. What is it?" Staring at the screen. "What's the skin made of? And why was I so scared?" "Because it's terrifying," responds Jocelyn. The Doctor, "But I've met a million ugly bugs. I'm an ugly bug. But that thing made me run. I just wonder why." But Ruby's smart. She's piecing this world together. Thing is, this place is completely mad, but it sort of makes sense. Because you've got babies, you've got a nanny, and you've got a bogeyman. You've got a literal monster living down below. It's like a children's story come to life. The Doctor, grim, and every story has a hero. And then later on in the episode, this exchange happens. Ruby, "It grew the bogeyman." The Doctor, "Yes. I said so 6 years ago. The machine is the mother and father to the babies. And it's mother and father to the bogeyman as well." The Doctor, "And why? Because Jocelyn said, education software ran out of control and you said," Ruby, "It's like a story. The teaching software, it told a story. It invented the bogeyman for the babies, Space Babies. The machine was literal, like a computer. It literally said, babies need stories, they need fiction, they need monsters. That's why I'm scared. It's all deliberate. It's infrasound. The bogeyman is roaring at 17 hertz. That's the exact pitch designed to make you scared. It's scary because it's meant to be. The machine made it big and tall and noisy, and it was built out of," and then they go on to say that the bogeyman was built out of literal bogies from the ship. A very, very dumb story. But the reason I took you on that tangent was to say that even back early in Space Babies, this idea of things being made out of stories and stories coming to life was prevalent even back in Space Babies. Even if you go back to Church on Ruby Road, the Doctor's narration of Ruby's birth sounds like a storybook, like a Disney fairy tale.
Once upon a time, late on Christmas Eve.
And I mean, the references to writing and story and fiction only grow stronger and stronger as the series goes by. Culminating in episodes like Lux, where they literally break out of an episode to talk to a group of Doctor Who fans. Or Lucky Day, where Conrad tells a story of what he thinks UNIT are doing and lies to the public, creating his own reality. So my theory is essentially twofold. One, I think that this entire era has basically existed ever since the Church on Ruby Road in some kind of story-based reality. And I mean, if you want to get really classic Who referential, you could even make it the land of fiction, controlled by Mrs. Flood. I think Mrs. Flood is the god of stories. I mean, it makes perfect sense, because we know that the gods get stronger through stories. That's established in the story in the engine. That's what they feed on. So surely, the strongest god of them all would be the god that controls stories, right? Like, that makes sense. Gods feed off stories to gain power and to become real, so therefore the most powerful of them would be the god of stories. And I've said before on multiple occasions how much she seems to love the idea of shows and shows ending and all of that sort of stuff. I reckon that she is basically the god of stories, or essentially, in other words, the writer, if you want to put it like that. Someone who, with the stroke of a pen, can rewrite the rules of reality, hence the reality war. If you want a more practical example of how this could work, think Rumpelstiltskin in Shrek Forever After, as an example. If Mrs. Flood is the writer, then who are the other two members of the Unholy Trinity? Because we know that the finale composes of 3 villains. And now I myself in the past have speculated, are they Time Lords? Are they demons from hell? What are they? And I think I've figured it out. If Mrs. Flood is the writer, then surely Conrad is, in some way, the viewer, the audience, essentially. Think about it. What do we see him do in most of his episode? He has a podcast. He says Doctor Who special effects look crap. He adores the Doctor and sees him as like this great figure, at least initially. And he's very specifically shown, first of all, in 2007, right around the time where Doctor Who was hitting its initial peaks back in Series 3. So I reckon that's who Conrad represents. Basically a twisted version of the audience, who Mrs. Flood is basically attempting to appeal to with her stories. And so who is the third member of this trifecta of the Unholy Trinity? Well, in my head, you have the writer, you have the audience, and you have the protagonist, right? A story can't go anywhere without its protagonist. And the protagonist, in this case, of course, is the Doctor. And as the Doctor said in Space Babies, every story needs a hero. So what if, in the finale, as part of Mrs. Flood changing reality, she changes the Doctor? Basically changes his personality, makes him a different character to fulfill a brand new narrative, and it's up to Belinda, Ruby, and all of his friends to basically get him back to the way he was. And thus, basically, if the Doctor is restored to their normal self, and Mrs. Flood and Conrad are defeated, the message will be that Doctor Who is never just one thing, and its future can be limitless. This is just my idea of where they could be taking this story, but it all kind of lines up to me if you actually sit and think about it. You've got the constant running motif of stories throughout this era, you've got a character who's constantly mentioning shows ending, you've got a villain who is essentially a Doctor Who fan turned bad, and at the centre you have the Doctor, a character who is frequently pulled into different directions by different writers out of the universe. That's what I think this is going to try and say. I think this is going to try and be a meta-commentary, essentially, on Doctor Who and the essence of not only the programme, but also of the medium that it's a part of, and us as an audience, and where Doctor Who fits into the current TV landscape. And the more that I think about this idea, the more it just lines up. All the winks to camera and other fourth wall breaks, it's all part of this whole thing. Because you'll notice that in the 60th, the Toymaker, who by all intents and purposes probably could break the fourth wall, never does. it only actually starts in Church on Ruby Road with the introduction of Mrs. Flood. Whether it'll work out, I don't know, and I could be wrong, but that's where my head's at right now, after seeing that episode. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.